Hi there, my name is James, and this week, along with Stephanie and Amber, we'll be talking about happiness, hope, and empathy. Um, the main readings that I'll be looking at will be the central reading by Holmes, as well as the recommended readings by Bartram and Znader. So for this reading, as it is the essential reading, is focused on optimism. And optimism is related to happiness and the feelings of happiness, but sociologists are not entirely sure where and how this relationship occurs, and hence requires further study to close this gap. Holmes suggests that research into this area of emotions is often limited because the study of sociology and the researchers who work in this field often focus predominantly on the negative aspects of society and actions that impact the world as a whole. These limitations also fail to look at how people in dire circumstances manage to get by and somehow are still enjoying themselves. In terms of optimism, though, Holmes attempts to explain what and how optimism functions by referring to another sociologist named Oliver Bennett, who argues that optimism is the optimism of everyday life performs important social functions, especially in maintaining physical and psychological health, family and social relationships, and in achieving goal. Holmes also notes that Bennett argues that the optimists are supported by cultures of optimism, which essentially means that one's optimism, though it may be out of touch from the real world, are supported by cultural policies. Those who have or live with an optimistic outlook also tend to be in better health and have healthier habits than someone who has a pessimistic outlook on life. Holmes points out that in sociology, there is not a lot of optimism due to the methods and thoughts in how sociologists attempt to solve social problems than just social questions. Bennett states that sociology is essentially structured on a disease model of human functioning, which makes social problems all but impossible to solve due to the broad nature and terminology that make up and define social problems. A social problem can include crime, violence of all sorts, such as sexual, physical, mental, political, and illnesses and disease, poverty and unemployment. So, what are the origins of optimism? Well, Holmes identifies the works by Auguste Comte and his fellow sociologists of the 19th century as the starting point, or at least the earliest academics who are identified as optimists due to their beliefs, views, and works that aim to progress to a better world. Holmes provides and discusses optimism, and in some cases pessimism, according to the writings and works of these early 19th century sociologists, including those of Auguste Comte, Karl Marx, Max Weber, and Emile Durkheim. For Comte, in order to understand social development and society as a whole was to investigate this through the lens of the social sciences, and that development through evolution, development, and innovation meant social improvement. Optimism for Comte then arises from the belief that there is an order through natural law to the social world and should not be modified as humans lack understanding of how society works. Comte also believed that through establishing order to the social life, humans can live better as this order provides the ability for living a rational, organized life. For Marx, optimism lies in the belief of progress that is centered on the path and movement of greater freedoms. These greater freedoms arise through the overthrow of a capitalist property class by the working class who see capitalism as exploiting and oppressing their fellow workers. By overthrowing capitalism, the working class can establish a system whereby collective power would progress society into that where class was abolished. This system is called communism. Like Marx, optimism for Durkheim is centered on the development and advancement of attaining more freedoms, but is more focused on the individual rather than political. Durkheim argues this by stating that industrialization and specialized areas of labor gives the ability to exercise greater individuality, whereas before industrialization, individuality was limited due to the rigid bonds of society. Essentially, Durkheim believes that industrialization is positive and beneficial to society as it gives the individual greater choice due to the complex divisions of labor, and specialization giving the individual more satisfaction as the work they perform becomes much more personal, which drives the individual to be more optimistic. Unlike the shared views of Comte, Marx, and Durkheim, which are that progress and order are beneficial for society and human emotions, Weber believes that progress restricts and continues to restrict human beings and their freedoms. Weber also sees history as a process of disenchantment, whereby rationalization, science, and a bureaucratic process rob us of individuality and meaningfulness in life. Holmes suggests that Weber has this pessimistic outlook because of social factors related to the rise and defeat of his home country of Germany following its defeat in World War I and the subsequent economic disaster caused by Allied sanctions. We will now look at what Bartram says about happiness, which comes from the recommended reading note for this week. Happiness as an area of research is thought to have originated in psychology as a method of countering the dominance of topics such as mental health and various psychological conditions. For Bartram, as a research area, happiness is a rather difficult topic due to the fragmented methodology and the research itself which can lead to inaccurate results or findings. However, Bartram suggests that in order to study happiness, it must first be established by sociologists to understand the differences between objective and subjective well-being to accurately measure happiness levels. The most common way to measure happiness is through qualitative and quantitative surveys of parts of a population. However, like most research, there are limitations that could cause inaccuracies in these surveys. According to Bartram, several early researchers of happiness have come from the economic world, which has a core concern regarding happiness, income, economic growth, and the relations that link these together. The research into these relations have led to what is called the Easterlin paradox, created by Richard Easterlin, who theorizes that those with higher incomes are happier than those with lower incomes, but an increase in one's income generally does not lead to an increase in happiness. Therefore, Bartram states from Easterlin's findings that growth in the economy, whether it be on individual or whole state basis, does not contribute or give meaning to happiness levels. But a country's context, in terms of its economy and unemployment levels, can affect happiness, but on a small individual scale. Bartram presents an example of this, whereby a country with a high level of unemployment causes those who have jobs to become fearful of losing their positions, which subsequently lowers their happiness levels. This reading by Snyder will talk about compassion. Compassion, according to Snyder, is an emotion that involves being concerned with anyone from a family member to a random stranger who may be suffering, and that the compulsion or urge to assist that person is what manifests compassion. Compassion emerges publicly through the awareness of social problems and a moral demand to address other people's suffering through both civil society and democracy. Addressing social problems can include organized activity and expressing solidarity with those who are suffering. In terms of public compassion, this has been developed through the interpretations and understandings of two perspectives, that of a market and the other of a democratic process. The perspective of democratic process views that compassion becomes more utilized and widespread with a reduction of social distinctions, which include such categories as corporate and financial. The market perspective is understood to extend and project the public scope of compassion, as well as projecting the sphere of moral concern. With these perspectives, plus public compassion, brings about the emergence of humanitarianism, which advocates for the end of pain for all of humanity. The ideas of compassion extend back into the medieval age and was influenced heavy by the Christian ideal of agape, which translates to love. During the medieval age, and even today, the following classical statement is quite relevant on how people in society should treat each other and is taken from 1 Corinthians chapter 13, verses 4 to 8, which is written by the Apostle Paul, and it says, "Love is patient and kind. Love does not envy or boast. It is not arrogant or rude. It does not insist on its own way. It is not irritable or resentful. It does not rejoice at wrongdoing, but rejoices with the truth. Love bears all things, believes all things, hopes all things, endures all things. Love never ends." Thank you for watching this presentation, and I hope you have enjoyed this.